Welcome back. Today is one of the 3 hottest days of the summer here in South Korea, also known as JOONGBOK, when many are encouraged to eat well to better endure the blistering heat. Now, a popular dish is ginseng chicken soup, also known as samgyetang here in the country. Now, for more on the dining on occasions, that is, I have a panel of foreign journalists here in the studio. I have Jack Barton. Jack, welcome back.
It's great to be here again.
I also have Louis Palligiano. Louis, it's good to have you here.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Jack, let's start off on a light note then. Do you know what food is normally consumed here in South Korea during the summer?
Well, we've got all sorts of energy and stamina foods in South Korea. It would take a day probably to list them all, but I think there are 3 big ones for the bok days. One of them would be the cold bean paste soup, which is the kongguksu, very popular. After that, there would be eel, which is also very popular in this season. But of course, the king of the dishes is, as you mentioned before, the chicken dish, samgyetang, and that is my personal favorite as well. I'm sure all the samgyetang restaurants will be absolutely packed, given it's JOONGBOK today. I went in early and had one yesterday in one of those little restaurants where the ceiling is so low you have to crouch to get to your table. And it's a favorite for a number of reasons. One, I love it, but also when my Korean father-in-law was still alive, it's a dish we would always eat together. Every time we went out, we had the samgyetang. So I think it's a perfect dish for this season, but it also brings back some good memories for me.
Right, it does. My father's dish as well, favorite, bless his soul. What about you, Louis? We understand that samgyetang is very popular. What are your thoughts now on having this boiling bowl of samgyetang to fight the sweltering summer here in the country? What are your thoughts on that?
So at first I was very surprised by the idea to eat some warm boiling specialty when it's so warm outside. And then I was even more surprised when actually go in the restaurant. As you said, it's very packed, with the people are queuing in front of them for the most famous in Seoul. So you have to wait some time for 30 minutes, and then you're in front of this big pot and you say, oh no, I couldn't. Do you have pat bingsu? Do you have something else? No, pat bingsu is like a kind of like a pill ice, which is very nice and look like ice cream. And you start to eat it and you are totally melting, like your nose is running, you are sweating a lot and feel very bad. And strangely, after that, after this food, which is very tasty, enjoyable, is so nutritious. There is a lot of herbal thing inside, like jujube, like ginseng and stuff like this. You feel very revigorated, and when you go outside, you feel good. And the warmth is not so hard to you can feel and you understand why the close dynamic between medicine and food in Korea. At first can be surprising, but in a good way. You eat warm and the result is very effective.
Right, and staying with what Louis just said, Jack, do you believe there's a relatively perhaps greater public interest among Koreans in food that seeks to perhaps boost your health?
I think the answer is yes. If you look all around the world, of course, it's in many cultures, particularly here in the Asia-Pacific, foods that are cooling or heating or have medicinal values. But usually in other countries, we see food taken when someone is feeling a bit under the weather. Even in our culture, we'll have a chicken soup if someone has a flu, or you will perhaps we see many aphrodisiac foods. There's oysters in the West, foods for the wedding night, but foods just to eat every day, which have these medicinal values, but you just incorporate it in your regular meal, and there's a real passion and awareness about that. I think that is really particular to South Korea. You don't really see that anywhere else, that kind of passion and knowledge. And I'm always amazed here because, in my culture, for a young person, a teenager, to know what the seasonal food is, if you ask them what are the seasonal foods, very few of them would be able to tell you one. Whereas you can look at, talk to some young hip-hop teens here and ask them what are the seasonal foods, and they'll tell you every single one of them. The food knowledge here is enormous, and that all feeds back into this knowledge of what food does for you on a regular basis, if you're feeling tired, if the weather is hot, if the weather is cold, if you've been pregnant, all of these factors. I think it really is. It's an art form in South Korea.
Right. And beyond South Korea then, Louis, food is also a fundamental part of culture there in France. That being said, that is, what can you tell us about perhaps the specific food enjoyed in France depending on the different seasons?
In fact, there's no special food like in Korea. Just in summer, during the hottest days, we used to have pasta or rice salad, cold pasta and cold rice mixed with olive oil and different vegetable. Or we eat like pomelo, things like this, a lot of ice cream. So not so special when it's warm, just drink a lot and have fresh food. But during the coldest day, we have a lot of specialty with cheese. It's kind of an excuse to beat the cold weather. We eat a lot of cheese, a lot of nutritious food, like a raclette. Raclette is a thing we share with a lot of friends usually. We have a little fry pan, we put cheese and we melt. And then we put the melted cheese on a boiled potato or delicatessen like smoked ham and things like this. And we enjoy like in community with good friends. And there is also fondue. Fondue is like ceramic pot where we put some melted cheese. And we have to dip some bread inside. And usually it's also with friends that we are sharing this. And if you drop your little piece of bread in the pot, they order you to do some silly challenge, like running naked in the snow or things like this. It can happen in France very often. So that's the kind of thing we do. Like, it's not really related to the warm or cold weather. It's just like tradition. Oh, it's cold. It reminds me when I went to ski. It reminds me of this mood of alpine countries. So we eat the proper food of these places.
Right, I see. Louis, is it common to have chicken soup there when you're feeling ill as well, like is the case over in Australia? What do you have when you're sick?
When you're sick, we have some veggie soup most of the time, warm veggie soup. And maybe that's all of white meat a lot.
Oh, I see.
But we don't mix chicken in a soup. No, that's not something we do.
I see, all right, I see. Jack, what about you? What can you tell us about the food consumed over in Australia during the sizzling summer?
It's a complicated answer because Australia has so many different ethnicities, about 240 ethnicities. 50% of the population are either born outside the country or have one or both parents who are born outside the country. So it's a big mix of all different traditions. Having said that, and it's middle of winter, of course, right now in Australia, because we're on the upside down of the world, or the top side, depending on which way you look at the globe. The barbecue in the middle of summer. It seems counterintuitive that on the hottest days you would go outside into the sun, cover yourself in sunscreen, and either in the backyard or preferably for everyone at the beach, you do a big barbecue. Now this used to be an Anglo-Australian habit, but now you're seeing everybody. If you go to the beach, you'll see Vietnamese families or different groups coming together. It's become very fancy, the cooking these days. At the barbecue, you'll have, you know, the bell peppers with their skins roasting and marinade seafood. But when I was young, it was just steak that had the consistency and the taste probably similar to the sole on your shoe, and sausages burnt to a crisp so that they were black, put on a piece of white bread with tomato sauce. I know it sounds horrific, but if you're brought up with it, my mouth almost waters thinking about it. And when you see a barbecue today, in the Bok days, it would be in Australia, they don't think of it as that, but the hottest days of the year, you'll have the barbecue, you'll still have all these fancy foods, but in the corner there will still be the burnt sausages.
Right, I see. I suppose we're also consuming the memory then of all that.
Absolutely.
Louis, as mentioned earlier then, food and culture intertwined. What does Korea's food perhaps tell you about its people and their culture?
So, as we said before, we can see the relation between medicine, health, and food, which is pretty intricate. And even for the youngest generation, we know very well, like every food have a purpose. Every banchan, every side dishes is for something. Like little fish, is like a calcium, and for everything is on the table for a reason. So you can really feel this. Like food is precious and important here. You can have this feeling, and also it's often related to the mood. Like when people are feeling depressed, they like to eat spicy food. You said fight heat with heat. It's a little bit like fighting emotional pain with
something physical.
Yeah, fire in your mouth, and you forget your problem when you lick tteokbokki with a very spicy sauce. So related to emotion, related to medicine, and also related to kind of collectivist society, traditionally. And people like to share everything. When you order a dish here, you can expect that your Korean friend wants to taste a bit, and all the banchan you eat together with the same chopstick and everything. And it's a big difference in France, for example. When you order something in the restaurant, what is in your plates, it's for you, only for you, and you can be very angry if someone tries to take some of your sandwich or some of your steak or something. You don't do that in France so much. So here it's not about sharing, so it says a lot about the personality of Korean.
Right, and staying with the idea of sharing, side dishes, as Louis mentioned, banchan, they're often refilled at restaurants here in the country. Jack, what does that practice of refilling banchan, free of charge also, tell you about or reflect about Korea's culture?
Well, I think the whole food culture here is very similar to what Louis was just saying. In the West, you have the individual, the culture of individualism, where the individual trumps the group or trumps the society, and the needs of the individual trump everything else. Whereas here that's turned on its head, and the needs of the group, and particularly of your friends and family, far outweigh the needs of the individual, to the point where the individual is almost erased. And we see that in the banchan and in the dishes. We see that in the way that people eat, with the sense of nunchi. You know, it's not just about sharing the food, it's about the pecking order of who's the oldest, who's the youngest. We particularly see that when the drinks come out amongst the men. There are all sorts of things going on that for a Westerner, they might not even be aware this is going on at the table. It might look invisible, but to a Korean it's incredibly important. Who's pouring what, who's doing what. And it all comes down to a sense of collectivism, but within that collectivism also the old Confucius idea of the responsibilities of each person, that person knowing what they are and fulfilling those responsibilities, and thus fulfilling that function and showing that you can work together as a family or as a group, as a team at the table. I think that's something great, and I've become the annoying person in the West now who has to try something from everybody else's plate and make everyone
I see. Totally understood though. Yeah. Louis, beyond seasons then, food also plays an important role depending on the occasion. Here in South Korea, women would have seaweed soup perhaps after giving birth to a child. And that being said, is there a similar dining recommendation for French women after or during their postpartum period?
It's very different. In fact, it's not discussed a lot. We just say a woman needs protein, eggs and red meat for iron, things like this. But there is no special dish. And in fact, there is few recommendations. We just say for breastfeeding women, it would be better if they have organic food. That's the main advice doctors are giving. Or special food if they are overweight or underweight or have diabetes. In fact, if there is a health issue, they ask them to have some specific kind of food, but if there's no problems, they can eat whatever they want. And I know it's very surprising here, because when you're a woman, when you just give birth, if you don't have your seaweed soup immediately, like your mother or your mother-in-law think you will not survive. It's very important. And also I have a Korean coworker who gave birth in the US, and they gave her like kind of snacks with a glass of water and a hot dog after she gave birth. And I feel like she kept a little trauma from this.
Yes, my mother as well, because my baby sister was born abroad and she didn't understand how you were given tea and toast and not something else for breakfast. And Jack, what's the case like in Australia?
Again, you know, it's a big cultural mix there, so each different culture has its way, but the general health advice is actually not so heavy on the protein. It's more about fresh vegetables, getting in lots of things like bell peppers full of vitamin C, non-saturated fats through avocados, Australian fruits like mango and from the tropical north, but also whole grains, so whole oats, brown rice, brown bread, this sort of thing. And as you mentioned, organic, Louis, a very big focus on organic, getting away from chemicals. So that is the official advice, you know, coming from the medical community. Most people follow that. I tend to think it probably is a little incomplete because there is no seaweed soup on it.
Right, I see. Louis, in some cases, what is consumed or practiced in one culture, it's not consumed or practiced in another. And that being said, do you suppose we need to perhaps respect these diverse dining cultures? Or should we seek a shared experience, one that is understood by all global diners, so to speak?
I think it's important that every culinary tradition respected more than everything. Like, it's not good to water down a Korean dish because some people cannot eat spicy. I know some are complaining that in every broth there is a meat product or thing like this. So it's very hard sometimes for vegan or vegetarian to find their food. What is important is to have choice, in fact. And I think in a country like Korea, you have choice with like bibimbap and things like this. You can totally have it without egg, without meat or things like this. So it's important to keep the identity for this. And I heard a lot of people, foreigners, coming here. And in the first days, they are complaining about the specificity of the food here. And they want to have pizza, they want to have stuff like this. And I recommend to them, no, try more. You will get used to it. And it's part of the fun. Like when you visit a country, when you live in a new country, to eat like the local, it's one of the main pleasure and one of the most important things. So once again, do not water down the culinary history of Korea. It's a priority for me.
Right. And what are your thoughts on the matter, Jack? What do you think about respecting diverse dining cultures?
Absolutely. If you look around the world today, we all sort of dress the same. We have the same haircuts. If you go to the high street here or London, you'll see the same kinds of shops, or Melbourne, anywhere. There is homogeneity through just about everything. The last bastion of our cultural heritage usually comes through food in most cases. So we don't need to go out of our way and protect it, because it's what people grow up and they love it and they don't want to get rid of it. But I think it's wonderful. You go to a country and it's the one thing that will tell you something about the people, because everything else, it looks kind of same, but the food will tell you volumes about the society you're in. The way it's eaten will tell you volumes about the society. So I think it's wonderful. One of the great things of going to another country, as you mentioned, don't eat the food that you eat at home. Go have the local dining experience, enjoy the food, but also get a cultural lesson while you're eating it.
Right, I completely agree. All right, Jack, thank you so much for your insight today. And Louis, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts.